Welcome to the Sleeping Archive, where history comes alive through the voices of those who lived it.
I remember the way sunlight touched the walls, not the firelight or the flicker of lamps, but true sunlight. Mid-morning, just after breakfast, when my mother's garden still smelled of crushed rosemary and baked figs, it would stretch across the tiles of the atrium in a pattern I could trace with my fingers, almost like embroidery, and when the wind came through the open arch, it would shift the shadows, and I would imagine them dancing. That's how I remember Pompeii. Not the ash, not the silence, but the color. My name is Lucia. I was 17 that summer. I painted walls, not the grand frescoes in the villas of senators. I wasn't skilled enough for those. I painted the backs of kitchens, the inner courtyards of bakeries, the faded edge of a sea nymph near the fishmonger's stall. But I was careful. I layered ochre with my breath held. I mixed indigo like it was perfume. I treated every wall like someone would fall in love with it. On the morning of the festival, the sky was strange. Not dark, not loud, just off. The gulls were quiet. The air felt flat. My father said it was only the heat. He wrapped a damp cloth around his head and left for the market. My mother was already baking. I had been commissioned to paint a small vine behind a shrine. Just green tendrils curling behind a statue of Venus. I packed my pigments and left before the second bell. The streets were busy with festival preparations, garlands being tied, honey cakes stacked like little crowns, musicians rehearsing in alleyways. A boy offered me a flower, and I tucked it into my sash. I remember its color, red with a dark center. I made it to the client's courtyard, unpacked my tools, and set to work. I was halfway through the first vine when I heard it, a sound like distant thunder, but without an end, not a crack, not a boom, just something rolling across the edge of hearing. The brush paused in my hand. I looked up. The client's daughter stood at the doorway with a basket of figs, her eyes wide. "What was that?" she whispered. I didn't answer. I didn't know. But something in me, something low and quiet, decided not to paint anymore. I packed my things without explaining why. The fig she handed me was warm. I took a bite. It tasted like honey and stone. I walked home slowly, pretending everything was fine. But as I passed the public fountain, I saw the water trembling. The sky was still clear, but the birds were gone. And for the first time since I was a child, I looked up at the mountain, and it looked back. Fresco painting is not for the impatient. Each wall we touched had to be prepared in stages. First, the rough plaster, the Eruption, laid in broad strokes, then the intonaco, a fine lime mix smoothed to a mirror finish. Only then, while still damp, could we apply pigment. The colors fused with the wall itself. It was as close to permanence as a mortal hand could create. My father called it a dance between breath and stone. That morning, I was painting the vineyard behind Dionysus, small rows of vines trailing over hills, framed by olive trees and distant rooftops. I imagined the view from a high hill above Pompeii, the golden haze of afternoon sun, the shimmer of sea far beyond. Father worked beside me in silence. His lines were clean, deliberate. He always began with the eyes, whether man, god, or beast. He said if you could breathe life into the eyes, the rest would follow. Eyes are windows, he reminded me, sketching the face of a laughing satyr. A wall doesn't need speech, it needs a soul. We had painted together since I was old enough to hold a brush. At first, I only mixed colors, measuring powders, wetting lime, stirring carefully. Then I learned how to prime the walls, how to draw outlines, how to shade shadows so softly they seemed to shift in torchlight. He was patient, stern sometimes, but never cruel. Once, I'd ruined a border by dropping wet plaster across a dry figure. I had sobbed with frustration. He had waited for me to finish crying, then handed me a chisel. "Then fix it," he said. So I did. and I never made the same mistake again. Our reputation had grown over the years. We painted temples, private villas, bathhouses, even tombs. My favorite was a commission we completed the previous spring in Neapolis, a domed ceiling painted to look like the heavens. Gold stars on deep blue, clouds swirling across curved plaster, birds in flight so lifelike they seemed ready to land on your shoulder. When we finished, the patron had wept. "I feel as though I've seen Olympus," he said. That was when I first began to understand what we truly offered people. Not just decoration, but transformation. We changed rooms into stories, walls into windows, homes into dreams. The triclinium in Publius's villa was the grandest room we had yet worked in, and Dionysus that day seemed to smile at us as we painted. I layered the vines behind him with extra care, threading them with small clusters of grapes, dark purple with a hint of red where the light would catch. Servants passed occasionally, offering cool water or cloths to wipe the sweat from our faces. Claudia, the cook, brought us a tray of figs and olives around midday. "The god of wine demands you don't faint before dinner," she joked. We sat for a moment, the walls around us half alive. The god watched over us, his arms still only half formed in the plaster. "I dreamed about this room once," I said aloud. Father raised an eyebrow. "Not this exact room," I clarified, "but a room like it, red walls, painted gods. But in my dream, the paint was moving, the vines were crawling up the wall." Dionysus blinked. He chuckled. "Maybe one day he will." The air was thick that afternoon, still heavy. No breeze moved the leaves in the garden outside. The peacocks, normally noisy, were quiet. I thought I saw one pacing slowly near the fountain, its feathers dragged low like a heavy cloak. The silence deepened. And I began to feel it, that strange feeling, like the moment before thunder. A pressure in the air, a tension beneath the floor. I dipped my brush into a soft green and tried to ignore it. I told myself I was imagining things, that the heat was playing tricks on my senses, that nothing had changed. But even as I painted, I noticed the plaster was drying faster than usual. The water in our bowls felt warmer. And far off, I thought I heard a low groan, the kind you feel more than hear. My father glanced at the wall, then at the jars on the shelf, then at me. Neither of us said anything. We kept painting. August 24th began like any other day. The sky was clear. The sun rose warm and untroubled. From the villa's garden, I could hear the usual stirrings of life. Slaves whispering, birds chirping, brooms sweeping stone. The scent of rosemary and crushed grape leaves lingered in the air. If I could have paused time, I would have paused it here. I was adding detail to a painted cypress when I noticed the dogs. They were quiet, not dozing in the sun as they usually did, but pacing, low to the ground, ears back. Caesar, the white mastiff, was digging furiously beside one of the marble columns in the atrium, his nails clicking against the tile like frantic fingers. "Caesar," I called softly, but he ignored me. My father glanced at the scene, frowned slightly, then turned back to the fresco. He did not like to name worries too early. It was bad luck, he believed, to give fear a voice. We returned to our painting. Later that morning, I looked up and froze. The birds were fleeing. From every rooftop, every tree, every garden wall, they rose in clouds. Finches, sparrows, ravens, pigeons. Even the caged birds in the villa's peristyle thrashed in panic. They flew west, away from the mountain, away from something we had not yet seen. "Father," I said, pointing. He came to the window. His brush still stained with ochre, he wiped his hands slowly on a cloth. We watched in silence. The sky was a chaos of wings. "I have never seen the like," he murmured. The villa seemed to hold its breath. Only the fountain continued to splash lazily into its stone basin. Then Sophocles, the old gardener, appeared at the door. He looked pale, his hair dusted with ash, though I did not understand how yet. "Master Marcus," he whispered, "the wells are dry." My father blinked. All of them? Yes, the kitchen well, the stable, even the deep one near the lower terrace. I checked them all twice. We exchanged a glance. August was hot, yes, but all the wells at once? Could be the pipes, I offered weakly, though even I didn't believe it. That afternoon, we tried to keep working. The villa was unusually quiet. Guests had retreated to their rooms. The cook had no fire going. The air felt wrong, too still, too warm, as if it pressed against the skin. I returned to the wall. The mountain I was painting stared back at me now, its form too still, its beauty now, somehow, suspicious. I added shadows to the trees, darker tones to the slope. I told myself it was to improve the composition. Then came the sound, not loud at first, more like a groan, deep, below the threshold of hearing, more felt in the bones than heard with the ears. It rolled under the villa like thunder dragging its heels. The jars on our shelf began to tremble. A glass cup fell from a table across the hall and shattered. My father straightened. Lucia. Then the ground moved. Not the playful shiver we were used to. This was different. A long, terrible heave that sent cracks splitting across the walls. Our scaffolding groaned. A brush rolled off my palette and landed with a splat on Dionysus's face. The rumble deepened into a roar. It felt as if the earth itself was waking from a long sleep. I stumbled backward, catching myself against the unfinished wall. My hand left a streak of green across the cypress tree. And then came the hissing, louder than before, a dry, fierce sound like water thrown on a red-hot pan. Look, Father pointed out the window. We saw the mountain open, not split in two, not explode, but bloom. That's how I remember it, as if the peak unfolded like a dark flower, and from its center rose a pillar of ash and fire, straight and tall and fast, too fast. It climbed higher than the clouds, then fanned outward. A great black canopy spread across the sky. And then, the ash began to fall. Soft at first, almost beautiful. Gray petals drifting down, catching in the peacock's feathers, the olive leaves, the folds of my tunic. But it kept falling, and falling. It fell into our paint jars, onto the half-finished wall, onto the fruit bowls and the sleeping mats and the garden path. It coated the world in silence, and we had not even begun to flee. The ash kept falling. It clung to our skin, our hair, our clothes. It found its way into bowls of water, under fingernails, into the folds of drapery. At first I tried to brush it off. Soon I stopped trying. The air was thick and hard to breathe. It tasted dry, like metal. The color of the world had changed. Everything was gray. The blue sky, the red tiles, the green trees, all dusted into dullness. In the courtyard, panic had replaced silence. Slaves ran with bundles clutched to their chests. Claudia the cook shouted for her son. A man I didn't recognize was trying to load scrolls and pottery into a cart. Someone sobbed. Someone prayed. The peacocks no longer strutted. They huddled beneath a bench, their tails dragging in the dust, their jeweled colors turned to ash. My father grabbed my arm. Lucia, we leave. Now. I turned back toward the triclinium. But the wall... Leave it, he said. I have to take... No. Still, I ran. I couldn't help myself. I grabbed a jar of blue, a pouch of cinnabar, and my grandfather's palette knife. The rest I left behind. By the time we reached the atrium, the ash was ankle-deep. It muffled sound. The villa no longer echoed. It swallowed footsteps and voices. Outside the gates, the road was crowded. Families, servants, patricians with jewelry still on their fingers, children too, stunned to cry. Some rode donkeys. Most walked. A few dragged carts, their wheels struggling through the soft ash. Vesuvius towered behind us. It was no longer a mountain. It was a god. The plume of smoke reached high into the sky, darkening the sun. Lightning flickered through it. strange red streaks like cracks in the world. The roar was constant now, not thunder, not wind, something deeper, a voice too ancient to understand. My father handed me a cloth. Breathe through this. We moved with the others toward Nuceria. The air shimmered with heat and smoke. The sky was darker than dusk. The olive groves we passed looked like statues, coated in fine silver ash. I looked back once. Pompeii was disappearing. The city was still there, but quieter, as if already remembering itself. The red rooftops were turning gray. The streets were vanishing. The temples looked like ruins. The amphitheater, the market stalls, the bathhouse where we once laughed after work. They were fading under the weight of silence. But still, I was not afraid. I was watching the gods paint. A new world, drawn in shadow and fire. We passed a small shrine to Mercury. Someone had left an offering, a coin, a crust of bread. The bread was gray. I whispered a prayer anyway. The road was slow. The ash was deepening. Some people began to fall behind. Older men, women with infants. Young boys carried their siblings on their backs. One man pushed his elderly mother in a wheelbarrow. All were silent. We walked for hours. My legs ached. My throat burned. But we didn't stop. By the time the stars came out, what few could pierce the ash-dark sky, we were miles from Pompeii. And Vesuvius still glowed. The column of smoke had spread, stretching like wings across the heavens. Lightning danced constantly within it, red and gold and violet. And in the middle of it all, the mountain, silent again, watching, as if it had finished what it came to say. We reached my aunt's house late that night. She opened the door with tears in her eyes, pulling us inside, brushing ash from our shoulders as if she could wipe away the day. Her husband stoked the hearth. Her children watched in silence. We drank hot water with herbs and wiped our faces with damp cloths. The fire cracked, but the mountain's voice still rumbled in the distance. "Will Pompeii survive?" one of the children asked. I looked at my father. He shook his head slowly. "No," he said, "not in the way you remember. But in stories, maybe. In memories." I couldn't sleep that night. I sat by the window, watching the glow still pulsing on the horizon. The sky flickered red, like a lantern behind gauze. The ash fell here too, slower, but steady. The roofs of the nearby houses were lightly dusted, like they had aged overnight. In the morning, the world was quiet, gray. In the days that followed, refugees passed through the village, some barefoot, some wrapped in cloaks that had once been fine. One woman carried a statue of Jupiter clutched to her chest like a child. Another had nothing but a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth. The stories were all the same. The city was buried, the heat unbearable, roofs collapsing, ash pouring through cracks. Herculaneum, they said, was worse. Entire families gone in moments. But somehow we had survived. We did not return. What would we have found? A workshop full of cracked jars? A triclinium half swallowed by dust? A fresco of Dionysus looking out with unfinished eyes? We went to Neapolis. There was work. There was always work. My father aged quickly after that. He no longer painted gods. He painted gardens, still lifes, quiet things. He said the gods had spoken too loudly. I, however, kept painting Vesuvius, sometimes sleeping, sometimes with a veil of smoke. Once, I painted it mid-eruption. A merchant bought the piece, called it blasphemy. He hung it anyway, said it made his guests go quiet. Years passed. I became known for my landscapes. People said I could make walls vanish. One woman walked into a bathhouse I had painted and swore she smelled the sea. I smiled and said nothing, but always, somewhere, I painted the mountain. When I grew old, too old to hold a steady brush, young painters would come to ask me questions. They wanted stories. They wanted to hear about the terror. But that's not what I remembered. I remembered the beauty, the way the ash fell like snow, the way the sky turned to fire and shadow, the strange silence as hundreds fled together, the way a god watched from a wall we had just begun to paint. And I remembered the moment it all changed, not with a cry, but with a whisper. a crack, a breath. I painted the gods, and the gods painted back. I had seen transformation, true transformation. Not the kind that decorates, but the kind that remakes. Even now, I believe my fresco still waits, buried beneath centuries, beneath pumice and dust. Maybe someone will find it. Maybe Dionysus still stares out, unfinished, still dreaming. And if he does, maybe he smiles. Because beauty does not die. It only waits. It waits beneath the ash. It waits beneath time. It waits for hands to uncover it, for eyes to see again. And when they do, they will know. We were here. We dreamed. We painted. We lived. And even in the end, we found wonder.
You've been listening to The Sleeping Archive. Sleep well. History will wait.